Well, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? Hey, pat yourself on the back that you made it here on a Sunday with a chilly breeze. Right? Yeah, this is that San Diego life. So I'm glad to see all of you guys, and I'm excited to be with you. I'm Jonathan. If I haven't had the chance to meet you, I'd love to meet you. And I'm excited as this week we are continuing. We've been in a series of talks called Building a Healthy Life in God. And you see today that we are, what we've been talking about is what does it actually look like to have a healthy life, like a day-to-day, real life in God. A lot of times as a church, we're really good at answering a lot of questions that people aren't asking. And today, and in this series of talks, we're talking about hopefully some real questions and real ways of how we can live a life that's healthy on God. And last week, we started our first portion on marriage. And one of the things we talked about last week is that marriage is God's idea. Can I just tell you that today? Marriage is and was God's idea. It's not just like an old school tradition or a fad that's sort of fading out. No, the idea of marriage was at the very beginning of the Bible, the very first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. In chapter 2, it says this: "That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." And it says of Adam and his wife Eve that they were both naked and they felt no shame. As you look throughout the scripture, you see that God's design for marriage, and you'll see a theme throughout of two becoming one. Have you heard that before? Two becoming one? Like, that's actually God's idea. It's two families in marriage that become one symbolically, prophetically. It's two bodies becoming one physically. It's two hearts becoming one spiritually. You see, if I could put the goal of marriage, God's design for marriage, in one word, it would be quite simply the word oneness. Oneness. Marriage is all about learning to walk in life as one with God and one with your spouse. As you guys know, our School of Transformation is going this summer to southern Mexico for a mission trip. And this next week, actually, I'm going for about 48 hours to Quintana Roo with our school directors, Arlita and Jose. Yeah, what? And one of the reasons we're going is we're going to spend time with the leadership team of a new church there, and we're going to do a special service there. But one of the other reasons that we're going is to help plan for this trip that our students are taking. We've been doing trips like this for years, these exploratory setup trips. And one of the main reasons is because you can't ever trust pictures. Right? Can anybody give me an amen? You can't trust pictures. Have you ever planned a trip where you just looked at the pictures? Right? Because when you're on that Airbnb or that travel site, it's hard to know where that hotel actually is, right? Like, how close to the beach is it really? Or is that passenger van really brand new? Or is that room at the hotel really large enough for 40 people? Or is that restaurant really good for groups? I remember one time we reserved hotel rooms in Brazil that looked amazing in the pictures. And then once we got there, we realized that the rooms were barely bigger than a shoebox. Like, you could literally touch both walls with your arms extended. Or I remember renting a house for a team in Costa Rica one year. And in the picture, it looked like it was like this very nice neighborhood, exclusive, secure. But once we got there, we realized it was on a busy street, smack dab in the middle of the hood. Or one year, I was the one responsible for booking a hotel in LA for our elders that for a conference we were going to, and I found this amazing deal. I'm always really good at finding deals, right? I found this amazing deal. that was close to the conference center, breakfast included, was high-fiving myself, right? Until we pulled up and we realized that there was no place to park our car. There were bars on literally everything. And the guy at the desk seemed angry just looking at us. You can't always trust pictures, right? Because sometimes the picture doesn't actually tell the truth. Sometimes the picture doesn't tell the whole story. Sometimes the picture can be edited so that what you see is not really what you were going to get. The picture can create an expectation that if you're not careful, you're going to end up disappointed. I can't think of a more true analogy for marriage. Because if there's anything that is true of marriage, is that marriage is all about expectations. Marriage is all about expectations. And if we're honest, every one of us here has an expectation for what marriage should or shouldn't look like. For what we want it to be like. What we think it would be like. And if I could just put a phrase that I think we often expect out of marriage, it would be quite simply this: happily ever after. Happily ever after, right? I mean, if Disney has discipled us in anything, it's that someday my prince will come. Someday I'll find my love. I felt the musical grace just come on me. That was Snow White, right, with Prince Charming, and Cinderella also was with Prince Charming, popular guy. We haven't even mentioned Sleeping Beauty, Ariel, Belle, or actually every other romantic comedy for that matter, right? I think if we could put in one word what people expect from marriage as we just look at the media and the movies and everything that we've been brought up with, I think we probably expect happiness, right? Like happiness. I think that's what we want. And if just you look at the definition of happiness, the happiness is the feeling of contentment, the experience of positive emotions. I want you to think about that for a second. Because for many of us, we come to marriage and our expectation is to have happy feelings, right? Like to have good vibes and positive emotions. The problem, the danger of that way of thinking is that anytime you're not experiencing happy feelings and good vibes and positive emotions in your marriage, you think that something's wrong. I'll never forget when Suzanne and I had been dating for several months and I was thinking about asking her to marry me. And, we were very in love, and you know how people are when they're in love. Right? We were riding on the clouds every day. Suzanne could do no wrong. There was no sacrifice too great for her. But after several months of dating, we started to have conflict. And some serious things started to sort of emerge. And when these big things began to surface, you want to know something? I didn't feel happy. Right? I remember one day my dad was talking to me, and he was asking me if I was going to ask Suzanne to marry me. And I remember saying, well, I want to, but I don't know. Because sometimes I'm just not feeling it. And I remember my dad looking at me, and he laughed, and he and my mom will be married 50 years in August. And he said, you can't ever trust your feelings. He's like, feelings come and go. He taught me a very key lesson at 23, 24 years old of marriage is about much more than feelings. And as I began to learn more about marriage and God's intention for marriage, I began to realize that my expectation for happiness in marriage was not only wrong, but it was dangerous. Now, don't get me wrong, my wife is my best friend. She's the person that I can trust more than anyone. I've experienced the most joy in my relationship with her than with anyone else. But we have been able to experience that joy together because we have understood that God's design for our marriage is not to make us happy. It feels like it bears repeating. God's design for marriage is not to make us happy. Can I just break that to you today? God's design for marriage is not to make you happy. Actually, I think what would be more accurate is to say that God's design for marriage is to make you holy. Right? Let's just step back for 1 second and consider the fact that if you look throughout the scriptures, our goal as Christians is what? Is to look more like Jesus. It's to live like Jesus. It's to love like Jesus, right? Like if we could just put it really simple, our goal is to be like Jesus. Like that's what being a Christian, and you know the word Christian means little Christ. Like, so that is your and my goal. So if that's true, then that means that the goal of your marriage is to make you look more like Jesus. Therefore, if your marriage doesn't make you press into God, if your marriage doesn't make you better at forgiving, if your marriage doesn't make you more humble or more of a servant, if it doesn't make you realize how much you need Jesus, then your marriage isn't working. I've done lots of weddings. And something that the couple is never told at the wedding is that right when they leave the chapel, they're going straight into the fire. This doesn't sound quite as good, right, at the wedding ceremony. But how many of us know how true that can be? Because as you go into marriage, you're going into the fire of the pressure and refinement, all somehow of the impurities in your heart and your mind are going to come out. When you get married, you're actually going to discover all the junk that is really inside you. But if you press in, your marriage will be forged in the fire, able to weather the storms, and you will be even more dependent on God than ever before. God's desire is that through the covenant of marriage, you would be refined and made holy through communion with your spouse. His desire is that marriage would make us look more like Jesus. We could just stop right there. Here's something I wish someone would have told me. Don't look at your spouse as someone to make you happy, because they're going to let you down. But rather, look at your spouse as God's chosen instrument to help drive you back to Him. This week we're talking about one of the ways our marriage makes us look more like Jesus. We're talking about the intimacy that is produced in marriage through the fire of conflict. I think of how much Suzanne and I have grown in this area in our last 18 years of marriage. And of course, when you start in marriage, right, typically it starts with all sunshine and sparkles, right? It's all just beautiful and wonderful, and you're gazing into each other's eyes, and you just can't imagine being with anyone else, right? And then typically sometime after the honeymoon, you start having your first marital disagreements. And I think about for Suzanne and I, two sensitive souls that we would rather not have conflict with anyone, that was really hard. But at the same time, we're both human, so we're both hurting each other. And so we're experiencing pain, and so it got harder and harder to gaze lovingly into each other's eyes. And how many of you know that after a while, if that pain isn't addressed, rather than sitting across from them and gazing in their eyes, actually, you don't want to be anywhere near them. And so early in our marriage, we were that really mature couple where I would see Suzanne wasn't acting the same. And so I would say, hey, is everything okay? And she would say, I'm fine. But me being the really perceptive guy that I am, I was like, I know you're not fine because of the way you just said, I'm fine. Then she would try to beat me at my own game. And she would change her voice and say, no, really, I'm fine. And I'd be like, I know you're not fine because you just scratched your head when you said I'm fine. And then she would say something like, I don't know why you're trying to be my psychologist. I really am fine. But I'm seeing, okay, she says she's fine, but she doesn't want to look at me, talk to me, or be in the same room as me. So I would eventually say something like, okay, I know you're not fine, so just let me know when you want to talk about it. And typically, after a while, she would be processing. She'd process what she's feeling, and then she'd come and say, you know, I think I'm feeling this way because I was hurt about this. And then after talking it through, and after a few tears, mostly mine, we were able to come to the other side. But get this, feeling stronger. Something I want you to see throughout is that healthy conflict brings intimacy. Like, this is the big picture, concept. Healthy conflict brings intimacy. If you can commit to working things through as a couple, you will be stronger on the other side. You see that this is the beauty of conflict done in a way that honors God. It always bears fruit. And when both people are humble and willing, which we're going to talk about in a second, it always brings intimacy. You know, I found that conflict is one of the areas that we most have to renew our minds. Look at the person next to you and say, you got to renew your mind. We got to renew our minds. We have to renew our minds because so few have actually seen this modeled in a healthy way. I was making my notes and I actually wanted to write, no one has ever seen this modeled in a healthy way, but hopefully we're getting into the culture. Hopefully we're starting to model a little better, but so few of us have ever seen this done in the right way. Because I don't know about you, when I think about a marriage conflict, I'm not thinking of a conflict, I'm thinking of a fight. I'm thinking of a woman throwing all her husband's stuff out in the front yard, furniture getting tossed, plates getting broken, someone sleeping on the couch. We think of screaming and name calling and revenge and total chaos. Anybody else? And I know in a room this big, perhaps this has actually been your experience. Perhaps this is something you saw in your parents' marriage. Or this is something you've experienced in your own marriage. Or maybe when you think of conflict, what you think of actually is physical or verbal or emotional abuse from someone. And if that's you, I am truly sorry. That is absolutely heartbreaking, and no one should ever have to experience that. And that is why when we think of conflict in any kind of relationship, we automatically think that something must be wrong. Because how could it possibly be good? But let me tell you today that healthy conflict is the key to a lasting, mature relationship of any kind. especially in marriage. You see, I think there are a couple of ways that conflict that is often done, and this is actually in Christian marriage that I see this. And if I could give you a picture of what I see too often, it would be something like this. It'd be something more akin to an old-fashioned bar fight. Thankfully, I've never been in a bar fight because what happens is that people are just grabbing anything they can get their hands on to take somebody out. It's chaos. You're breaking tables. You're grabbing bottles. It's pandemonium. Sometimes you see the old Western movies and the people are literally crawling out of the saloon on their hands and knees because there's no safe place in a bar fight. And this is how too many married couples fight. The purpose is to hurt the other person. There are no boundaries or rules. It's whoever can strike the first and the biggest blow. I think this is how many people approach conflict in marriage. Whereas the way of doing conflict in a way that honors God that I see it very differently. Perhaps we could more think of it along the lines of this. Mind that you don't have to go with the under the legs. But I see it a little bit more like a tennis match. Why? Tennis is... Okay, Sylvia, you can take it down or you're getting a little distracted. Tennis is very civil. There's order. There's clear boundary lines. Each player has a turn to hit the ball and then hit it back to the other. Actually, your goal is to stay in bounds, not out of bounds. This is a way of doing conflict in a way that honors your spouse and God. And I want to give you today 3 keys to healthy conflict in relationships. This definitely applies to marriage, but even if you're not married today, these are 3 principles that will help you open the door to deeper intimacy in all relationships. And the first key we find in Ephesians 4:15, which is number 1, we speak the truth in love. We speak the truth in love. 4:15, Ephesians 4:15 says this, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. Proverbs 3 and 4 reinforces the same truth. It says this, do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart, so you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man. Both of these passages are emphasizing the same truth, that conflict should happen with both truth and love, or as it says in Proverbs 3, kindness and truth. One cannot be there without the other. What you speak in your marriage will make you or break you. And typically we all tend towards one of these 2 sides when we talk about love and truth or kindness and truth. First, we have the truth tellers, right? You know who you are. Because you've probably already told us, right? You're like, well, if they want to know the truth or if they want to know what I think, I'll just tell them, right? But let me tell you that truth by itself can be dangerous. And then there are the love people. Where's my love people at, right? You guys just want to love and ride on the love boat, right? Only good vibes and warm feelings here, right? They just want everybody to get along, want to make sure everybody's feeling good. But let me tell you, love by itself is pointless. Like literally, it's without direction. Real love is always coupled with truth. The marriage where love and truth are in greater balance will be a healthier marriage. The marriage where love and truth are not in balance will be an unhealthy marriage. Perhaps you're in a conflict with your spouse. You're in a conflict, but you're right. Like, you know you're right. Like, you know, like, I for real am right this time, right? And your spouse is really, like, in the wrong. But this is a key thing you have to get. If you are right, but if you are putting your spouse down, if you are ridiculing them, if you are not responding in love, then you are actually the one that is wrong. Be careful when you try to win in conflict. Because I'm going to warn you, if you try to win, if you are not careful, you are actually going to lose in the eyes of God. Why? Because 1 Corinthians 13 says it for us. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Conflict that honors God doesn't seek to win or lose. It's not about winning, and it's not about losing. Remember, it's about oneness. It's about intimacy with God and each other. Let me say it a different way. If you're in a conflict with your spouse, or anyone for that matter, you can't stop being a Christian. Right? Like, you see this all the time. You have these like sweet Christian people. But once you cut them off in traffic, or rub them the wrong way, or take their spot in line at Costco, it's like a 4-letter word fiesta. We don't ever just take off our character or our integrity or our Christ following when we're mad. Right? And let me say this. Again, your success in marriage depends on the words you use with your spouse. By God's grace, Suzanne and I have had a very strong and growing marriage. But I think it's because we've realized the power of our words spoken in truth and love. And also we've learned that there are certain words that should never belong in marriage. And again, this goes back to the tennis illustration. There are certain things said in marriage that are in bounds and out of bounds. There are rules of warfare. Let me give you a few examples. Let me give you a few examples of out-of-bounds communication in marriage. Some of you guys might want to write these things down. Number 1, sarcasm. We're about to get real, right? We're about to get real. Sarcasm is actually the best way to break down communication. Sarcasm erodes trust. It hurts feelings. It creates greater distance. Silent treatment. Another way to say silent treatment is manipulation, right? Trying to control the narrative. And when you can't, you're out, right? Name calling. I'm going to blame it on Sylvia because she's the one showing them. Name calling, that's a good one. Like this is basic, right? This is something we tell our kids. You can't put a name on anybody else. Name calling does not build trust. Time travel. This isn't like getting in a DeLorean and going back to 1985. No, time travel, another way to say this is bringing up old stuff. Right? I think a lot of times we carry an offense or something that happened 20 years ago with our spouse that we keep in our back pocket until that right moment, when they come at you with something, you're like, well, phew. Remember what happened 20 years ago? Like, as my kids say, a sick burn, right? Time travel's bringing up old stuff. Again, we're Christians. You have to decide if you're going to forgive or not. And when you forgive, you are choosing not to bring that hurtful offense back into the relationship. Right? Again, like, we're Christians. Or then we have hurtful words. Hurtful words like always and never. Can I just tell you, you will do your relationship such favors when you eliminate the words always and never from your relationship. Why? Because it's just not true. No one always does anything or never does something. Like I'll just say, we have never used, I said never. We have never used never. We have never used never or always in our relationship. Because it was in our premarital counseling that we heard this, and we're like, okay, it's out. Like, that is not legal in our relationship. We don't say should or shouldn't, because we're not trying to parent each other either. We're not saying you ought to do this or you should do this. We're not trying to fix the other person. Accusations. Right? We don't accuse our spouse. We don't assume that they are trying to hurt us. We assume the best. We don't accuse, we assume the best. The Bible actually describes Satan as the accuser of the brethren. Satan's an accuser. Not you, not me, not to our spouse. And then the word divorce. What we often say, divorce does not belong. That word does not belong in marriage. And of course, we're not talking about infidelity. We're not talking about abuse. What I'm more saying here is that divorce, what I think happens is divorce is often used like a grenade in a fight. Right? You got to fight and you need that one leg up. So you're just like, and you just, let's throw that one out. See how that goes. It shouldn't be, divorce isn't to be used as a threat. It's not a back pocket weapon. It shouldn't be used to manipulate the other person. Some of you guys might need to erase these words from your vocabulary. And I just want you to see this for a second. These are techniques. These are tools used in conflict. That your conflict could actually be something small, right? Like, you might be talking about like a disagreement of the color of the carpet, or right, you know, we like in marriage, like we get in fights about dumb stuff sometimes, right? But what happens is we use these conflict escalators. We start calling a name, and then it's like, it's not about the bar of soap anymore. Now it's because you call me that, and now I'm going to call you that. And then you get on this wicked snowball. Right? What was the first point? We speak the truth in love. We speak the truth in love. Number 2, they're not all going to take this long. Number 2, be humble. We speak the truth in love. We be humble. James 4:6 says this. God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. What I've seen is that in any conflict, there's always a defining moment. It always happens this way. And it's the moment when you decide how you're going to respond. Right? Are you going to get low and bow down in humility? You might even be right. You might even have 100 reasons to be angry and hurt. But are you going to bow down in humility? Or are you going to rise up in offense and pride? The reason this is so important, well, actually, there are two reasons. Is number one, God promises to show favor on the humble. If you respond humbly, God has your back. If you respond humbly, God will lift you up. If you respond humbly, it's a promise. There will be more grace that you will experience. The second reason this is so important is that people who respond in pride tend to do very dumb things. People don't respond well when they act out of their hurt. When they act out of their offense, they say hurtful things. They hurt others. They walk into sin. Right? Sometimes people were actually truly hurt by someone, but instead of taking it to God, they end up in a bigger hole. They end up walking into adultery or pornography or sin because they didn't take their pain first to God. When you are in conflict, when you've been hurt, submit to God. What does it say? Submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee. You see, you can't resist the devil if you're not first submitted to God. And God will lift you up. Last point is this. Be the first to respond. I'll end with this. Matthew 7. Jesus gives a clear call for how our response should be when we're in conflict with others. Matthew 7 verse 3 says this. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How could you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then look at this, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Here's the connection that I want you to see. Jesus makes a connection for us between our personal relationship to God and our ability to see others correctly. Said differently, you can't see others the way God does until you change you. Let me make it clear. You can't change your spouse. You can't make them do anything. If you're single today and you're thinking that you want to make your future spouse to be the person you want them to be, let me tell you, you will be very disappointed. Because your own response to God is actually the only thing you have control of. Don't get me wrong. Don't ever stop praying for your spouse. But it is God who can transform the human heart. God is a transformer of the human heart. Perhaps you're here today and your spouse isn't following God. Perhaps you're crying out for a breakthrough. Let me just tell you that you're probably not going to see a breakthrough as you try to nag and scold your spouse. But you're probably going to see more breakthrough when you change what you can change and allow God to be the one to bring conviction and transformation. And let me just say, we want to be a family. And maybe you're here and your marriage is in crisis. Maybe you're here and you don't know which way to turn. We want to help you find the resources. We want to help you find counseling. we're a family. And we want to walk marriage, even learning to have conflict in marriage, we want to walk out as a spiritual family. Amen. Okay, let's stand. Father, we come to you having talked about a lot. And Lord, I am trusting you for you to speak to each person that is here. And I can only imagine that as we talk about marriage and talk about pain and conflict, that for the majority of people here, there's a lot of pain that comes up. And as we look at the word, as we look at the scripture, we are confronted with the fact that for many of us, our relationships have not looked like a relationship that honors you. For many of us, we see the ways that we've been almost like that tennis illustration. We've been out of line. And so, Father, I just want to pray for all of us right now. Would you search our hearts? I just want to invite you to do that right now. Just put your hand over your heart. God, would you search my heart? I know in marriage and especially in challenging marriages, it's so easy to constantly be thinking about the other person. It's so easy to think about, well, if my spouse could see me or understand me or know how I feel, or if my spouse could just get it and get me and see all the things that they need to change. But God, we recognize that really our own life and our own response is the only thing that we have control of. So God, we say today, would you start with me? Start with my own heart. Start with my own response. God, we want to choose humility. Maybe for some of you today, you need to let go of the right to be right. Maybe for some of you, there's some words that you need to let go of. Maybe you've been throwing grenades. Maybe you've been doing things in a way that are out of bounds. And we've all been there. That's why I'm so grateful for the grace and the forgiveness of God. I'm so grateful for the way that He meets us right where we are. And God, I just want to ask today across this room, I just want to declare the word hope. Hope, hope. Hope into every heart, hope into every soul, hope into every marriage. We come to you today, God, believing for, longing for breakthrough. And we invite you to speak. And if you're here today and you don't know if your heart has been given to Jesus, if you don't know if you're a Christian, if you don't know if you're following Jesus, I just want to invite you just to say a simple prayer. And it's that God knows your heart. You can say, Jesus, you can just say that to Him. Jesus, come into my life. Jesus, come and speak to my heart. God, I give my life to you today. God, restore my life. Save my life. I give you the control. I give you all that I am. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving your life for me.